Couple went missing on a hiking trip. 10 years later, a torn backpack revealed everything. The last photograph of Sarah and Ethan Chen showed them silhouetted against a vibrant sunrise, arms raised in triumph at the trailhead of the Coldridge Mountains. Their faces were illuminated with excitement, backpacks perfectly packed, hiking boots freshly laced. The image was uploaded to Sarah's social media with the caption, "Adventure awaits. 3 days disconnecting from the world with my soulmate. Perfect weekend Coldridge Trail." It was the last anyone had heard from them. Emily Winters stared at that same photograph for the 1000th time, tracing her sister's familiar profile with her fingertip. 10 years had passed since Sarah and Ethan had vanished without a trace on that crisp autumn weekend, yet the pain remained as sharp as broken glass. The search parties, the helicopter sweeps, the cadaver dogs, all had yielded nothing. The vast wilderness of the Coldridge Mountains had swallowed them whole, leaving behind only questions and the gnawing ache of uncertainty. "You're looking at it again," said Michael, Emily's husband, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Today marked the 10th anniversary of their disappearance. "I can't help it," Emily whispered, her voice catching. "Some days I can almost convince myself that she's still out there." The Chens had been the couple everyone envied. College sweethearts, who had built a life together that seemed plucked from a fairy tale. Sarah, with her infectious laugh and artistic soul, had opened a small but successful photography studio. Ethan, brilliant and charismatic, had climbed the corporate ladder with ease. They hosted dinner parties where the wine flowed freely and the conversation sparkled. They traveled to exotic destinations, bringing back stories that made their friends' lives seem pedestrian by comparison. They complemented each other perfectly, Emily often told people when they asked about her sister. Sarah was the dreamer, Ethan was the planner. She taught him spontaneity, he gave her stability. What Emily kept to herself was how that perfect balance had sometimes seemed too perfect, too practiced. The way Sarah's smile occasionally didn't reach her eyes during those dinner parties. The hushed arguments Emily had overheard when visiting, the time she'd found her sister crying in the bathroom at their parents' anniversary celebration, quickly wiping away tears and blaming allergies. But these were private doubts, whispers she barely acknowledged even to herself. After all, what relationship was without its rough patches? And in the wake of their disappearance, such thoughts felt like a betrayal. The investigation had been thorough, at least initially. The Chen's car had been found at the trailhead parking lot, locked and undisturbed. Their permit had been properly registered at the ranger station. The weather that weekend had been clear and mild. No sudden storms, no flash floods. They were experienced hikers who had tackled more challenging trails in the past. "It's as if they simply walked off the face of the earth," the lead detective had told Emily, after 3 months of searching. His eyes had been hollow with fatigue and frustration. "We've explored every possible scenario. Every possible scenario." The phrase haunted Emily. Did that include the possibility that they might have wanted to disappear? That thought had visited her during sleepless nights, only to be banished in daylight. Sarah would never put her through such torment willingly. Whatever had happened on that mountain, it hadn't been by choice. The official report eventually settled on the most likely explanation: a hiking accident. Perhaps they had strayed from the trail, encountered wildlife, fallen from an unmarked cliff. The mountains were vast and unforgiving. Bodies lost in such terrain weren't always recovered, the authorities explained with practiced sensitivity. A memorial service was held a year after their disappearance. 2 empty urns, photographs, and tearful eulogies. Emily had watched her parents age a decade in those 12 months, their grief carving deep lines into their faces. Ethan's mother had collapsed during the service, the finality of it too much to bear. But for Emily, that finality never came. She maintained her small ritual, visiting Sarah's favorite coffee shop on her birthday, keeping her phone number active just in case, and preserving the memorial shelf in her home office with fresh flowers each week. A frozen moment where hope, however painful, still flickered. "I spoke with Dr. Levine yesterday," Michael said carefully, referring to Emily's therapist. "She thinks it might be time to consider grief counseling again, especially with the anniversary." Emily nodded absently, placing the photograph back on the shelf beside a small, smooth stone Sarah had given her from a beach trip they'd taken as teenagers. "Maybe," she conceded, knowing she wouldn't call. Therapy implied acceptance, and acceptance meant letting go. The doorbell rang, startling them both. "That's probably Jenna with the casserole," Michael said, heading toward the door. Their neighbor brought food every year on this day, a kindness that had become tradition. Emily remained at the memorial shelf, straightening items that didn't need straightening. Her fingers brushed against the framed newspaper clipping, the last official story about the disappearance before the media had moved on to fresher tragedies. "Search suspended for missing hikers," the headline announced dispassionately. Voices drifted from the entryway, not Jenna's familiar chatter, but something more official, more grave. Emily's heart stumbled in her chest. Michael called, his tone carefully measured in a way that immediately sent adrenaline coursing through her. "There are some officers here, they'd like to speak with you." Time seemed to slow as she walked to the front door. Two uniformed park rangers stood awkwardly in her entryway, hats in hands. Behind them, a police detective in plain clothes studied her with sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Winters?" the detective said. "I'm Detective Ramirez. I understand you're the sister of Sarah Chen." Emily nodded, unable to form words as hope and dread collided within her. "We found something on the Coldridge Trail that you should see," the detective continued, producing a clear evidence bag from his jacket pocket. "Some hikers discovered it yesterday, about 5 miles from the main trail, near a dried stream bed." Inside the bag was a tattered piece of red nylon fabric, dirty and weathered but unmistakable. Emily's knees weakened. "That's," she began, her voice barely audible. "That's from Sarah's backpack, the one she took that weekend. It had a special compartment she added herself for her camera." The detective nodded. "We've recovered more than just this fragment, Mrs. Winters. We've found the backpack itself, wedged under some fallen rocks. And inside," he hesitated. "Inside we found a journal. Your sister's journal, along with some photographs and personal effects." Emily reached out instinctively, though she knew they wouldn't hand over evidence so carelessly. "After 10 years," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "After all this time, we'd like you to come down to the station," Detective Ramirez said gently. "There are some things in the journal, some entries that raise new questions about what might have happened to your sister and her husband." The photograph on the memorial shelf seemed to watch Emily as she grabbed her coat with trembling hands, her mind racing with possibilities. Whatever answers lay within those weathered pages, she knew with bone-deep certainty that the story of Sarah and Ethan's disappearance was far from over. For 10 years she had lived in the purgatory of not knowing. Now, as she followed the officers to their waiting vehicle, Emily was about to discover that some questions were more painful to answer than to ask. The police station smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, a scent Emily had come to associate with the worst days of her life. 10 years ago, she had sat in a similar room, same uncomfortable chairs, same flickering fluorescent lights as officers gently explained that the search for her sister and brother-in-law had yielded no results. Now she stared at the weathered red backpack laid carefully on the table before her, protected by clear plastic. Despite a decade of exposure to the elements, Sarah's handiwork was still visible. The extra padding she'd added around the camera compartment, the small embroidered sunflower near the top zipper, the reinforced straps she'd modified for better weight distribution. "We found it wedged beneath a rockslide area," Ranger Martinez explained, her voice soft with respect. "From our assessment, it appears the bag was initially trapped when some smaller rocks came down, then completely buried when a larger slide occurred years later. The recent drought caused significant erosion in that area, exposing parts of the material." Detective Ramirez carefully opened another evidence bag, revealing a leather-bound journal. The cover was warped, the pages rippled with water damage, but it remained largely intact. "This was inside a waterproof pouch in the inner compartment," he said. "Along with these," he laid out additional items, a silver watch with a cracked face, Ethan's favorite, a graduation gift from his father, 3 weathered photographs protected in plastic sleeves, a small metal compass, and a Ziploc bag containing what appeared to be a folded map. Emily reached for the photographs with trembling fingers, stopping just short of touching them. Through the evidence bag, she could make out a snapshot of Sarah and herself as teenagers, arms thrown around each other's shoulders at the beach. Another showed Sarah and Ethan on their wedding day. The third was unfamiliar, a cabin Emily didn't recognize. "May I?" she whispered. The detective nodded, helping her slip on a pair of latex gloves before allowing her to hold the protected photographs. The unfamiliar image showed a rustic wooden cabin nestled against pine trees, with mountains visible in the background. On the back, written in Sarah's neat handwriting, "Journey's End, Our Future." Emily's throat tightened. "I've never seen this place before. They never mentioned any cabin." Detective Ramirez made a note. "We're trying to identify its location. It might give us a lead." Her attention shifted to the journal. Unlike the modern digital lives they'd all come to lead, Sarah had always been old-fashioned about recording her thoughts. She'd kept journals since childhood, filling shelves with her elegant handwriting and pressed flowers. "We've only done a preliminary review," Ramirez said carefully, "but there are some concerning entries. Given the sensitive nature of the content, we thought it best if you reviewed it yourself." He slid the journal toward her, and Emily felt suddenly afraid. For a decade she had craved answers, had imagined countless scenarios explaining her sister's disappearance. But now, faced with the reality of those answers, she feared what truths might be inscribed in those pages. "Take your time," he said, rising from his chair. "I'll get you some water." Alone with the journal, Emily carefully opened the cover. The first entry was dated 2 months before the hiking trip. Sarah's familiar handwriting, looping and artistic, filled the page. "Ethan says it's time. We've been planning this for over a year, and now everything is falling into place. The policy is active, the accounts are set up, and the cabin is nearly ready. Sometimes I can hardly believe we're really going through with it, but when I think about the debts and the pressure, I know we don't have a choice. A fresh start, that's what he keeps calling it. We just disappear one day, leaving everything behind." It sounds both terrifying and exhilarating. Emily's hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the journal. This couldn't be right. This sounded like they had planned to vanish. Planned to break the hearts of everyone who loved them. She flipped forward several pages, scanning entries that detailed preparations, practicing wilderness survival, researching identity changes, calculating finances. Sarah's usually confident handwriting grew increasingly erratic, the entries shorter and more frantic as the date of the hike approached. Then, just 3 days before they disappeared, "I found the second phone. He's been communicating with someone, making arrangements I don't know about. When I confronted him, he said I was being paranoid, but I saw the texts. Just one ticket." "What does that mean? One ticket? I thought we were in this together. I've sacrificed everything for this plan, burned every bridge. If he's planning to leave me behind after the insurance pays out, I don't know what I'll do." Emily's world tilted on its axis. The perfect couple, the tragic accident. All of it suddenly reframed by these private words. Sarah and Ethan had planned to fake their deaths, to collect insurance money, to start new lives. But something had gone wrong. The final entry was dated the day they disappeared. "We reach the lookout point tomorrow. That's where we're supposed to leave the trail markers suggesting an accident. But I'm bringing this journal and the watch. If my suspicions are right, if he tries anything, someone needs to know the truth. I've hidden the cabin documents where he won't find them. I'm scared. This isn't what I agreed to. This isn't who I am." The door opened, and Detective Ramirez returned with a paper cup of water. He found Emily frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Winters?" he asked, cautiously. "They didn't have an accident," Emily whispered hoarsely. "They were running away. They planned the whole thing." She looked up, her eyes burning with betrayal and confusion. "But something went wrong. I think Ethan was planning to betray her." Ramirez nodded gravely. "That's our assessment as well. Given this new evidence, we're reopening the investigation. This is no longer just a tragic hiking accident." Emily stared at the journal, at the physical proof of her sister's deception. For 10 years she had kept faith, had mourned, had preserved Sarah's memory like a precious flame. Now that flame flickered uncertainly in the cold wind of truth. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ramirez said, gathering the evidence carefully, "we start looking for 2 people who might still be very much alive, and I believe you're going to help us find them." Emily sat in her living room, surrounded by photocopies of Sarah's journal entries, which Detective Ramirez had permitted her to take home. Michael had made tea, set it before her, and quietly retreated to give her space. She'd barely touched it. The revelation that her sister and brother-in-law had planned their own disappearance felt like a physical blow. Each memory she'd preserved now seemed tainted, each tear she'd shed over the past decade now felt wasted. The memorial shelf in the corner of the room, once a sacred space, now mocked her with its carefully tended grief. She picked up the entry from 6 months before their disappearance. Ethan says the insurance policy is in place. $2 million with a double indemnity clause if death occurs during a recreational activity. He's been so methodical about everything. The new identities are prepared. Marcus and Lydia Bennett. The paper trail ends in Ecuador, but will actually be heading north. The cabin is remote enough that no one will ever connect the dots. Sometimes I feel sick about what we're planning, especially when Emily calls or when Mom shows me old photo albums. But then I think about the debt collectors, the threats, the hole Ethan's failed startup left us in. There's no other way out. Emily crushed the paper in her fist. All those years they'd appeared so successful. The beautiful home, the exotic vacations, the lavish gifts. It had been a facade. Behind it all had been mounting debt, desperation. And now, this elaborate betrayal. She smoothed out the crumpled page, forcing herself to keep reading. The journal entries chronicled the careful planning, how they'd researched which hiking trail to use, how they'd practiced leaving false evidence of an accident, how they'd laundered money through a series of offshore accounts that couldn't be traced. But as the date of their disappearance approached, Sarah's entries grew increasingly paranoid. She'd begun to suspect Ethan was planning something she wasn't privy to. Found bank transfers to an account I don't recognize. When I asked about it, he became defensive, said it was part of the plan, a contingency fund. But why wouldn't he tell me about it before? And why is there only one name on the account? I copied down the account information while he was showering, just in case. 3 entries later, overheard Ethan on the phone speaking Portuguese, not Spanish. Our plan was Ecuador, but he's been learning Portuguese in secret. Brazil? I checked his desk drawer when he went for a run. Found a receipt for a single one-way ticket from Vancouver to Rio, dated 2 weeks after our accident. My name isn't on it. What is he planning? Emily's phone rang, startling her. Detective Ramirez's name flashed on the screen. We've been analyzing the financial records from back then, he said without preamble. Based on the account numbers Sarah wrote down in her journal, we've traced a series of transfers. $2 million in insurance money was paid out 6 months after they disappeared. Accidental death was determined after extensive searching yielded no bodies. So they got away with it, Emily said bitterly. Not exactly. The insurance money went into a holding account, but only a small portion was ever withdrawn, about $50,000 in the first month. The rest has sat untouched for nearly a decade. Emily sat up straighter. That doesn't make sense. Why go through all this trouble and then not take the money? Exactly. We've also checked immigration records for the names Sarah mentioned. Marcus and Lydia Bennett. Marcus Bennett entered Brazil 2 weeks after their disappearance, traveling alone. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. And Lydia? My sister? No record of a Lydia Bennett entering Brazil, Ecuador, or any neighboring countries during that period, Ramirez replied. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 months after their disappearance, a woman matching Sarah's general description, using the name Diana Walsh, rented an apartment in Vancouver. She stayed for approximately 8 months before disappearing again. The room seemed to tilt around Emily. You think Sarah survived? You think she's out there somewhere? Living under a different name? It's a strong possibility. The timeline matches what we're piecing together. If Sarah discovered Ethan was planning to betray her, take the insurance money, and leave her behind, perhaps even planning to eliminate her entirely during that hike, she might have fled. Maybe she confronted him on that mountain. Maybe something went wrong. And Ethan? What happened to him after Brazil? That's the strange part. Marcus Bennett flew from Rio to Lisbon 4 months after arrival. After that, the trail goes cold. No further record of him using that identity. Emily tried to process this information. Her sister, alive, hiding, running, and Ethan disappeared after fleeing with only a fraction of the money they'd schemed to obtain. The cabin, Emily said suddenly. The photograph and Sarah's things. Journey's End, she called it. That might be where she went. We're working on identifying the location based on geographical features in the photo. Ramirez confirmed. If we find it, we might find more answers, or even your sister. The possibility that Sarah might still be alive, that Emily might one day stand face to face with her again, sent a conflicting surge of emotions through her: hope, anger, confusion, longing. "There's one more thing," Ramirez said hesitantly. "We found partial fingerprints on the inner pocket of the backpack. They're recent, within the last year or so. Someone returned to the site, retrieved the backpack from wherever it was originally hidden, and then placed it where those hikers would find it." Emily's breath caught. "You think Sarah planted it there? That she wanted it to be found after all this time?" "It's possible. Or someone else might have found it and moved it. We're still investigating." After hanging up, Emily returned to the journal entries with renewed purpose. She was no longer reading the account of a tragedy, but unraveling clues in an elaborate deception. Her sister wasn't a victim of the wilderness. She was either a calculating conspirator or perhaps a woman who had found herself trapped in a dangerous game. Emily pulled out the photograph of the cabin and studied it more carefully. There was something familiar about the mountain ridge in the background, though she couldn't place it. If Sarah had left this photo behind deliberately, it was a message, perhaps even an invitation. For 10 years, Emily had kept her sister's memory alive. Now she would find the woman her sister had become, whatever the cost. Detective Ramirez and Emily established a makeshift investigation center in Emily's dining room. The table was covered with maps, financial documents, phone records, and photocopies of Sarah's journal entries. Michael had pushed furniture against the walls to make space for 3 large corkboards where they pinned timelines and photographs. The technical team identified the mountain range in Sarah's cabin photo. Ramirez explained, pointing to a topographical map. "It's the north face of Blackwater Ridge, about 300 miles from the Coldridge Mountains where they disappeared. Remote, but accessible by logging roads." Emily studied the area. So they had this planned all along. A hideaway where no one would look for them. Records show the property was purchased by a shell corporation 6 months before their disappearance. Paid in cash. Ramirez tacked another document to the board. The corporation dissolved 2 years later, but property taxes continued to be paid through an automated account until last year. Emily's fingers traced the contour lines on the map. Could Sarah still be there? Satellite imagery shows the cabin was occupied at least until recently. Smoke from the chimney, a maintained garden plot. Ramirez hesitated. "We've dispatched officers to investigate, but I wanted to prepare you. If Sarah is there, the reunion might not be what you're expecting." Emily nodded, throat tight. The sister she'd mourned and the woman who had orchestrated this deception might be 2 entirely different people. "What about the money?" she asked, turning to the financial documents. $2 million sitting untouched all these years. A forensic accountant the police had brought in spoke up. "The insurance payout went into an offshore account, but there's only been one significant withdrawal. $50,000 shortly after the funds were deposited. Since then, just small automatic withdrawals for property taxes and utilities." "And Ethan? Any trace of him after Portugal?" Ramirez shook his head. "Nothing under Marcus Bennett. We're checking other possible aliases, but it's as if he vanished." Emily turned back to Sarah's journal, rereading an entry from just before the hike. "I've made copies of all the documents and hidden them at the cabin. If something happens to me, the truth is there. I still want to believe Ethan wouldn't hurt me, but I'm not taking chances. The last transfer he made, I traced it. It wasn't just a bank account, it was payment to someone with a reputation for making problems disappear." Emily shivered. Had Ethan hired someone to ensure Sarah never made it off that mountain? A young officer burst into the room, holding a tablet. "Detective, we've got something." Local officers reached the cabin site. "It's abandoned, looks like it has been for months, but they found this in a hidden compartment under the floorboards." He turned the tablet toward them, showing a photograph of documents spread across a rustic wooden floor. Financial records, a handwritten confession from Sarah Chen detailing the insurance fraud scheme, and this, he swiped to the next image, a map with the location circled in red ink. "It's a coastal town in Washington state. That's only a 3-hour drive from here," Emily said, pulse quickening. Ramirez studied the image. "There's something else? Look at the date on that confession." Emily leaned closer. The document was dated just 3 months ago. "She knew we were closing in," Ramirez mused. "Left breadcrumbs for us to follow. But why now? After all these years of hiding? Ramirez had no answer, but Emily felt a theory forming. Sarah was tired of running, tired of living in shadows. Perhaps she wanted to be found, but on her own terms. While the team processed this new information, Emily stepped outside for air. The decade-old wound of loss had been ripped open, transformed into something else entirely. The grief counseling she'd attended, the memorial services, the tears shed at family gatherings when Sarah's name was mentioned, all of it built on a foundation of lies. Yet beneath her anger, a stubborn flicker of hope persisted. Her sister was alive. Whatever Sarah had done, whatever she had become, blood still bound them. Emily's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. The Lighthouse Cafe, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. Her hands trembling, Emily showed the message to Ramirez. It's in that coastal town, he confirmed after tracking the number. Untraceable burner phone. It has to be Sarah. I need to go, Emily said immediately. Alone, like she asked. Absolutely not. Ramirez countered. This could be dangerous. We don't know what happened between her and Ethan, if he's still in the picture. She's my sister, Emily insisted. If I show up with police, she'll disappear again. I've lost her once. I won't lose her again. After hours of negotiation, a compromise was reached. Emily would meet Sarah alone, but with plainclothes officers positioned nearby. She would wear a discreet tracking device and keep her phone on. That night, as Emily packed a small overnight bag, she found herself standing before the memorial shelf that had preserved Sarah's memory for a decade. With careful deliberation, she took down the photograph of them as teenagers. The same one found weathered in Sarah's backpack. Whatever confrontation awaited her in that coastal town, she wanted to carry this reminder of who they had been before the lies. The 3-hour drive the next morning gave Emily time to rehearse what she would say, what she would ask. But all her practiced words evaporated when she pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Lighthouse Cafe. The quaint building perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, its weathered blue siding and white trim creating a postcard-perfect scene. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped out of her car. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine. Through the cafe's front window she could see a woman sitting alone at a corner table, her back to the door, dark hair now streaked with early gray. Even from behind, Emily would have known her anywhere. 10 years of questions, of grief, of anger, all compressed into the handful of steps it took to reach the cafe door. Emily paused with her hand on the handle, her reflection ghosted in the glass. Whatever truth awaited her inside, there would be no going back to the comfortable uncertainty of the past decade. She pulled the door open, the cheerful bell announcing her arrival. And Sarah, wearing a stranger's face but with hauntingly familiar eyes, turned to meet her sister's gaze across the crowded room. The cafe hummed with afternoon conversation, the clinking of cutlery, and soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Yet between the two sisters, an ocean of silence stretched. Emily stood frozen at the entrance, her eyes locked with Sarah's. 10 years had etched fine lines around her sister's eyes and mouth. Her once vibrant chestnut hair now held streaks of silver, cut shorter than she'd ever worn it before. But the eyes, those were unchanged, the same warm hazel that had gazed out from countless family photographs. Sarah raised a trembling hand in a small wave, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Emily crossed the room in a daze, aware of the plainclothes officers at a distant table, pretending to study menus. "You came," Sarah said, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "I wasn't sure you would." Emily slid into the chair, her prepared speeches dissolving into a single question. "Why?" Sarah flinched as though struck. She wrapped her hands around a steaming mug, her knuckles white. "It's complicated. 10 years, Sarah. 10 years of believing you were finished. Mom and Dad never recovered. Did you know Dad had a heart attack 3 years after you disappeared? The doctors said grief was a contributing factor." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I cut myself off completely. I had to." "Had to?" Emily's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered it to a hiss. "You chose to. You and Ethan planned everything. The insurance fraud, the fake identities. I read your journal." A waitress approached, but Sarah waved her away. "The journal," Sarah echoed. "So you found it." "I wasn't sure if..." She broke off, collecting herself. Yes, we planned it. We were drowning. Ethan's startup collapsed, taking our life savings with it. Then we discovered he'd borrowed from people you don't say no to. Dangerous people. The threats started coming. Not just to us but mentions of my family too. You, Mom and Dad. So your solution was to vanish? To break our hearts? The betrayal still felt raw, a wound reopened. Sarah's gaze dropped to her hands. Ethan convinced me it was the only way. Stage a hiking accident, collect the insurance, pay off the debts, and disappear with new identities. Clean slate, she laughed bitterly. I believed him, I believed everything. Emily leaned forward. What happened on that mountain, Sarah? Where's Ethan now? Sarah's expression darkened. We hiked to the spot we'd chosen for the accident. We'd left clues along the trail, a torn piece of clothing, a dropped water bottle. But that morning, I'd found a text on Ethan's second phone. One plane ticket to Brazil. Not two, one, and a message about taking care of loose ends. The implication hung in the air between them. I confronted him at the lookout point. He denied everything at first, then got angry when I wouldn't let it go. We fought screaming at each other on that mountain ledge. He admitted it. He'd never planned for us both to disappear. Just him. With the insurance money, I was the accident that would be discovered. Emily felt sick. He was going to finish you? Sarah nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. He came at me. We struggled. He slipped. The edge was crumbling. I reached for him, but her voice broke. I watched him fall. And me. I watched my husband disappear into the ravine below. Emily sat back stunned. Did you look for him? For hours. I climbed down as far as I could, called his name until my voice gave out. Nothing. The ravine was deep, strewn with boulders. If the fall didn't finish him, exposure would have. I panicked. All I could think was that they'd never believe me. Not with our financial troubles, the insurance policy. They'd think I pushed him. So you ran. I grabbed the emergency pack we'd stashed, hiked out the back trail, and hitched a ride to the cabin. I lived there for months, terrified every day that they'd find Ethan's body, trace it back to me, but no news ever came. Emily struggled to reconcile this story with the evidence they'd found. The backpack. It was planted recently. Someone put it where those hikers would find it. Sarah nodded. That was me. After all these years I couldn't bear it anymore. The hiding, the guilt, the separation from everyone I loved. I went back to the trail last autumn. I'd kept the backpack as a reminder, I guess. I placed it where I knew it would eventually be discovered. And the money? The insurance payout is still sitting untouched. I took enough to survive, to establish my new identity. The rest, how could I touch it? It was blood money, tainted. Sarah reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of Emily's. I've been living quietly here for 7 years now. I own the small art gallery down the street. I teach painting classes to local children. I've built a life as Diana Walsh. It's a simple life, but it's honest. Silence fell between them again, filled with the weight of a decade's deception. Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs below, their rhythm as constant as the years that had passed. Why contact me now? Emily finally asked. Why risk everything after all this time? Sarah swallowed hard. I was diagnosed with lymphoma last year. The prognosis is good, but it made me realize I couldn't die with this secret. I couldn't leave you wondering forever. Her eyes pleaded for understanding. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Em. What I did, what we planned, it was unforgivable. But I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to hear it from me, not just from that journal. Emily felt tears streaming down her face unchecked. The sister she'd mourned sat before her, alive, changed, broken in ways she was only beginning to understand. The anger that had propelled her through this investigation still burned, but alongside it now flickered something else, a complicated compassion. Does anyone here know about who you really are? Sarah shook her head. No one. Not even. She stopped, flushed. Not even who? Robert. He owns the bookstore next to my gallery. We've been seeing each other for 3 years. Sarah twisted a simple silver band on her right hand. He asked me to marry him last month. I haven't given him an answer. How could I, with all these lies between us? Emily absorbed this information silently. Her sister, a different name, a different life, a different love. A decade of choices that had carried her further and further from the Sarah that Emily had known. "What happens now?" Sarah whispered. "Will you tell the police everything about Ethan?" Emily was acutely aware of the tracking device in her pocket, the plainclothes officers watching from across the room. Detective Ramirez waiting for her report. "They already suspect most of it," Emily said quietly. "They found the cabin, the documents you left there." Fear flashed across Sarah's face. "Are they here? Now?" Emily nodded slightly. "I wouldn't have found you otherwise." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, resignation settling over her features. "I understand. I've been preparing myself for this day. For the truth to finally catch up with me." The afternoon light was fading now, golden beams slanting through the cafe windows. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, vast and unknowable, like the decade that had separated them. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Emily said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever completely. What you did, it broke something in all of us." "I know," Sarah whispered. "But I'm glad you're alive." The truth of those words surprised Emily even as she spoke them. Whatever happens next, whatever they decide to do about Ethan, about the fraud, I'm glad I didn't lose you on that mountain. Sarah's hand finally bridged the gap between them, covering Emily's with tentative warmth. Two sisters, connected again by blood and memory, yet separated by choices that could never be undone. Outside the cafe window, Emily could see Detective Ramirez approaching, his expression solemn. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Sarah saw him too. She squeezed Emily's hand once, then let go, sitting up straighter as if preparing to face what came next. "I'm ready," she said softly. Emily realized that in a way they both were. 3 months after the confrontation at the Lighthouse Cafe, Emily stood on the deck of her beach house rental, watching waves crash against the shoreline. The coastal town Sarah had made her home had become a temporary refuge for Emily as well, a neutral territory where the sisters could begin the fragile process of reconciliation. Detective Ramirez had closed the case last week. With no evidence of foul play beyond Sarah's testimony, and Ethan's body never recovered despite an extensive search of the ravine, the investigation had reached its conclusion. The insurance company was pursuing civil action for the fraud, but Sarah's voluntary surrender and cooperation had resulted in a settlement rather than criminal charges. The remaining insurance money, nearly $1.9 million, would be returned, along with interest. Sarah, still legally Sarah Chen, despite living as Diana Walsh for years, faced legal consequences for her role in the insurance fraud, but her voluntary confession, cooperation, and the circumstances surrounding Ethan's apparent death had led to leniency, probation, community service, and financial restitution rather than imprisonment. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Flight lands at 3. Can't wait to see you." He had been her rock throughout this ordeal, managing their home and affairs while she extended her stay here, working remotely, and trying to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with the sister she'd grieved for a decade. The doorbell rang. Sarah, punctual as always for their morning walk. These walks had become a ritual, a controlled environment where they could navigate the minefield of their shared past. Some days they barely spoke, other days painful truths poured forth in torrents. Emily opened the door to find Sarah holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag that undoubtedly contained pastries from the bakery she favored. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her smile cautious. She looked healthier now than when they'd first reunited. Her cancer treatments progressing well, color returning to her face. They walked in companionable silence along the beach, the morning fog beginning to lift. Sarah had sold her gallery, preparing for the move she would make once her legal obligations were settled. She would never be Diana Walsh again, but she couldn't fully return to being the Sarah Chen of before, either. She existed now in a liminal space between identities. "Robert's coming to dinner tonight," Sarah said eventually. "He wants to meet you before you leave." Emily nodded. The bookstore owner had stood by Sarah through the public revelation of her past, his steady presence a counterbalance to the upheaval. He'd postponed their engagement, but not withdrawn it, a testament to his character that Emily respected. "I'd like that," she replied. Sarah stopped walking, turning to face the ocean. "I spoke with Mom last night." Emily's breath caught. Their parents had been the final, most difficult frontier in this journey toward reconciliation. The initial reunion had been devastating, their mother collapsing in shock, their father's face carved with anger and disbelief. Weeks of carefully mediated conversations had followed. "How was it?" Emily asked. "Better," she asked about the treatment. "Told me about her garden." Sarah's voice wavered. "She called me sweetheart at the end. Just once, but still." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. These small victories, a term of endearment, a question about health rather than betrayal, marked their gradual progress toward healing. "They're thinking about visiting next month," Emily said. "Not staying with you, not yet, but a hotel nearby." Sarah nodded, wiping away tears. "I'd like that." They continued walking, their footprints tracing parallel lines in the wet sand, occasionally converging, occasionally diverging. "I found an apartment in Seattle," Sarah said after a while. "It's close to a good oncology center. And not too far from you and Michael." The statement hung between them, a question disguised as information. Would their tentative reconciliation continue once they returned to the real world? Would Emily welcome her sister's proximity? Or would the constant reminder of betrayal prove too painful? Emily considered before answering. "The farmers market near us has an artisan section on Sundays. Some of the vendors sell paintings. You might look into it once you're settled." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was an opening, a possibility. Sarah's smile was tremulous but genuine. "I'd like that." They reached the lighthouse that gave the cafe its name, a white tower standing sentinel against the gray sky. From here, they could see the whole sweep of the coastline, including the small art gallery that had been Sarah's haven and the bookstore beside it where she had found an unexpected second chance at love. "Do you ever think about him?" Emily asked suddenly. "About Ethan?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Emily thought she might not answer. "Every day," she finally said. "I dream about that moment on the cliff. Sometimes I save him, sometimes I push him. I wake up not knowing which dream is worse." She wrapped her arms around herself. "The man I married and the man he became at the end. They feel like two different people. I mourn one and fear the other." Emily nodded, understanding something about the complexity of grief that she hadn't before. "I kept your memorial shelf," she admitted. "Even after I knew you were alive. I couldn't bring myself to take it down." "Maybe it's still needed," Sarah suggested quietly. "For the sisters we were, for the decade we lost." The tide was coming in now, erasing their footprints behind them. Emily thought about the journal entries that had led her here, the torn backpack that had changed everything. The past couldn't be undone, but perhaps it could be carried differently. "We should head back," Emily said as raindrops began to fall. "Michael will be here soon." As they turned, Sarah hesitated, then reached for her sister's hand, a gesture she hadn't attempted since that first day in the cafe. Emily stiffened momentarily, then allowed the contact, their fingers intertwining. It wasn't the easy affection of their youth, but it was something real, something honest. The path to genuine forgiveness would be long and uncertain, with no guarantee of completion. Some wounds never fully heal, they simply become part of who we are. But as they walked back along the shore, their steps fell into synchronized rhythm. Two women bound by blood and history, carrying the weight of a decade's deception, yet moving forward together. Behind them, the lighthouse beams swept across the darkening waters, a beacon guiding lost souls home, reminding them that even in the deepest night, light persists. Not the blinding illumination of perfect understanding or complete absolution, but the softer glow of compassion, of acceptance, of the choice to love despite having been wounded. It would have to be enough. For both of them it would have to be enough.